So we have done amplitude, which tells you how far away from the middle you get. We have done period, which tells you how long it takes to cycle one time. And now we're going to talk about moving it around the graph. A phase shift moves it left and right. And so if you go back to your handout where you have your just standard function, you see an A, a B, a C, and a D, right? Other than your sine and your X or your theta. And so we've already used A. What was A? Amplitude. We've actually already used B. What was B? Period. You find the period with B, 2 pi over absolute value of B. And now we're going to talk about how do you shift it left and right. And for this one, you use your C and your B. Negative C over the absolute value of B tells you how to move it left and right. So normally for both sine and cosine, you start at 0, 0, right? 0, 0. This will tell you if you go right or left with that. So if you go right or left with that. And it will tell you your starting point is going to no longer be 0, 0. It's going to be left or right of 0, 0. So it's the phase shift determines where to start the graph in relation to the origin. Where to start the graph in relation to the origin. That is phase shift. So that's left, right movement, okay? Vertical movement, that is up, down. For your vertical movement, you look at D. It is simply your D. All right, you don't negate it. If it's negative, you're going to move it down. If it's positive, you're going to move it up. This also determines where the midline for the graph will be. All right, so no longer are you going to think about amplitude just from the x-axis. You are going to find that midline, and your amplitude will be that far away from the midline. Okay, so if you were to go up with an amplitude of 3, you would actually go up 1, maybe for your midline, and then 3 above that and 3 below that. So wherever your midline is, that's where your amplitude is from, not just the x-axis. Up to this point, we haven't moved it up or down. So now we have to consider up and down movement that way as well. All right. And so then it gives you at the bottom of that handout, it tells you your steps for graphing. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to find those 4 pieces: amplitude, period, phase shift, and vertical shift. Amplitude, period, phase shift, and vertical shift. And then using your period and your phase shift, find the starting and ending point of a cycle of the graph, then divide it into 4 quarters. All right, so you will start at 0, 0. You will move it left or right to determine starting point with your phase shift. And then from your starting point, you will add your period to see your ending point, okay? And then once you have your starting and ending point, divide that into 4 quarters. Divide it in half, divide those in half again. You will also find your maximum and minimum points using your midline and your amplitude. Your midline and your amplitude. Midline and amplitude help you find your maximum and minimum points, all right? And then once you have all of that, you're just going to graph it using your wave. So you'll have to know cosine starts, middle, and ends at the midline. First quarter and third quarter are top and bottom, okay? For cosine, it starts at the top. It ends at the top, right? Halfway through it, it's at the lowest point, the minimum. And then first and third quarter, it's at the midline. And so you just have to remember where your quarters are for your 2 types of graphs. And then from there, you can actually graph it. All right, so we are literally going to list out the 4 things. We have amplitude. What is my amplitude for this one? 4. Then I have period. Right, so it's 2 pi over the absolute value of 2. So that is just pi. All right. Then I have phase shift. So I have negative c. What is negative c? Negative 7 pi over 6. And so I negate that, so that becomes positive, right? Negative, negative. Over, what was my b? 2. All right. Now, I need to keep, change, flip, pretty much, okay? So it's 7 pi over 6 divided by 2, so I would multiply by 1/2. So it's 7 pi over 12. Okay? 7 pi over 12. And then my last one is my vertical shift. That's very simple. That's just D. What is D? 2. Okay? So, this actually tells me also my midline. Vertical shift tells me my midline. So what I typically do with that vertical shift is I go to that point on the y-axis, it's vertical, and I draw this dotted line here. Okay?
So that's for the vertical?
Right. So that's the vertical shift. That actually just tells me where I'm starting as far as up and down goes. And so I have a visual of where the middle of my graph should be. Does that help? Middle of your graph. All right. And then from there, I do my amplitude. So I start at 2 and I go 4 up. So how high am I going to go? 6. And then from 2, I go 4 down. So how low am I going to go? -2. All right. So I have my high and my low. Now, phase shift is a little crazier here to me. So I have to think about 7 pi over 12. It's going to be close to what number here on this graph that I can see? So like 6 pi over 12 would be what?
1 pi over 2.
Yeah, 6 over 12 would be 1/2. So 6 pi over 12 would be here. Actually, if I went like 8 pi over 12, something like that, I guess you could do 2 pi over 3. That's not even on here though, but you could convert your 3 pi over 4 to 12. So what is 3 pi over 4 in 12s? 9 pi, right? And I need 7. So if this is 6 and this is 9, 7's going to be about right here. Everybody agree with that?
Yes.
So I am not going to get a ruler out and be like, technically you weren't 1/3. You know what I mean? So as long as you write it there and mark it. So mark it as 7 pi over 12. Okay? Does that make sense? Now my period is pi. So I started at 7 pi over 12. I need to cycle in 1 pi. So to find out where my end is, I'm just going to add my period. I'm going to add a pi. I want this in common denominators. What's my common denominator here?
Wow.
So 1 pi would be 12 pi over 12, right? So I'm going to say I'm going to add one of my periods here. So I'm going to end up at 19 pi over 12. Also not pretty. But if I was at 1/2 here, right? I can go, a whole pi would be a little past 1.5, right? Does that make sense? So if I'm a little past 1/2 and I need to add a pi, I'm going to be a little past 1.5 when I end. So right here should be about 19 pi over 12. Does that make sense? So if I started at pi over 2, a little past that, if I add a whole pi to it, I should be a little past 3 pi over 2. A little past. Okay? So this is my starting point. This is my ending point. I do not care if you eyeball your halfway marks and your quarter marks. Okay? So if I say that's my starting and ending, if I just want to eyeball it and say, well, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 here in between, I need to do a little past this marker here. And so I can just eyeball it if I want to. Halfway, 1/4, 3/4. Okay, does that make sense? Once you find your starting and ending point, eyeball the halfway, eyeball your quarters. So 1/2 and 1/2. Okay? Now, what type of graph is this? Sine or cosine?
Cosine.
So cosine, I start at my highest value, right? So I'm going to start then at my highest value, which is 6. Go to my starting point, 7 pi over 12. Start at my highest value of 6, right? At 1/4, where am I?
2.
I'm at the middle, right? And my middle in this case is going to be my midline right there, middle, okay? Halfway through, I'm at my lowest. Where's my lowest now?
-2.
-2. 3/4, I should be back at my midline. And then at the end, I should be back at my highest point. And so this graph is going to look something like this. Okay, a little bit off there. All right. All right. All right, so we're going to start with amplitude. What is my amplitude here?
3.
3. Then my period is going to be 2 pi over the absolute value of 3, which is 2 pi over 3. All right, my phase shift is going to be negative c, which is what?
Negative pi over 3.
Negative pi over 3 over b, which is, so I get negative pi over 9. If you have denominator, not denominator, you end up just multiplying because it's keep, change, flip, okay? And then my vertical shift here is just 1. All right, so far so good, right? Now, I'm going to draw my vertical shift here. All right, this is a function that cycles, okay? So I'm going to find my midline. I'm going to find my max. If my amplitude is 3, what's my max from 1? Add 3, 4. All right, what's my minimum then from 1? Negative 2. All right, so I have my max and min marked, all right? Now, normally I start at 0, but I need to start at negative pi over 9. Now, here's the deal. Negative pi over 9 is going to be on this particular graph, right? Because I'm already at 2/8 there. So, I mean, but sometimes your negative shift will throw you all the way off your graph to the left because they typically only give you your first quadrant. And so we're going to go ahead and add our period to it. So we're going to add 2 pi over 3. That's not like denominators. So what are my common denominators? 9. So multiply this by 3. That's 9. Multiply this by 3. That is 6. So I have negative 1 and positive 6. So 5 pi over 9 is where this would end. But it's a cycle. So I can actually start at 5 pi over 9. Does that make sense? It's a cycle. So if where I'm supposed to start is somewhere off my graph, add a cycle to it, start there, and add a new cycle. Okay? So 5 pi over 9, I can actually find on this graph somewhere. It's going to be where? Where is this going to be?
It's going to be between pi over 2 and 3 pi over 4.
So my closest one, if I got it to 18ths, right, that would be 9 over 18, and that would be 10 over 18. So it's going to be somewhere here, just past my pi over 2, right? Does that make sense? Common denominator of 18, right? 9 over 18.
So you have to find the common
10 over
denominator
18.
for all of them?
Well, I'm just trying to estimate where it is on the graph. So I could actually start this graph here instead of back there somewhere if I want to. It's a cycle. And so then I can add another 6 pi over 9 to it, which gives me what?
11 pi.
11 pi over 9. All right, 11 pi over 9. And that's going to be where?
It's going to be between
Like 5 pi over
pi
4?
and then 5 pi over 4. But
Right, because it's 1 and 2/9, right? So it's just past your pi, right? It's just like maybe here.
Sure.
We'll go with that. So this is going to be a teeny cycle here. And I could, like I said, with just pi over 9, I actually can fit that over here on the graph if I wanted to start to the left of the graph. But if sometimes it'll throw you way past what you can see. So you can just add a cycle and add another cycle. Because it literally repeats over and over and over, right? What type? So I have my starting and ending. I can estimate my middle and my 1/4 and my 2/4. This is going to be a tiny one. Okay? And then I can start. What type of graph do I have? Sine, cosine?
Sine.
I have a sine graph. So sine starts where?
On the
At your middle. My middle happens to be 1 here. So I'm going to start here. At 1/4, I'm at my maximum, which in this case is 4. All right. And then I go back to my middle point, right? My midline. Down to my lowest point at 3/4, back up to my middle here. And so it's going to look something like this.